I'm really looking forward to this show today. It's about how religious leaders and faith communities respond to difficult times, shall we say. 2026 is just full of difficult times. What do you do when you see injustice? What do you do when members of your flock are the objects of unjust actions? What do you do when you feel out of communion with the government of the place where you live? If you are a person of faith or a leader of a faith community, we're going to talk to a bunch of leaders of faith communities about that very question, and I can guarantee you it will be interesting. Okay, this song is getting to me. I'm verklempt already, and I've barely started the show. So we're going to talk today about the role of faith and faith leaders in troubled times, which we have right now in 2026. I do want to say, before we go in there, that 80% of the planning and structuring of this show had taken place before we went to war with Iran. And even though I am completely aware that there are commanders right now, combat unit commanders, telling their non-commissioned officers that the Iran war is part of God's plan and that President Donald Trump is the anointed, he was anointed by Jesus to light the signal fire, to start Armageddon and bring Christ back to earth. We're probably not going to talk that much about it today. I feel like that's a whole separate 49 minutes, and it's going to get in the way of a lot of ground that we have to cover. If it comes up, it comes up. But if you don't hear us talk about it, that's why, because we've got a lot of other ground to cover. All right, so joining me for the first part of this are the Reverend A.J. Johnson, pastor at the Urban Hope Refuge Church in Hartford, also director for neighborhood organizing at the Center for Leadership and Justice, and deputy chaplain to the Connecticut House of Representatives. Sierra Fox is cantor for a congregation Mishkan Israel in Hamden. We're going to be in with them. We've got other people to talk to as we go along here. So, Pastor Johnson, I'm going to start with you. You preside over a black church in a black neighborhood with black poverty and black problems. This feels what's going on for most of 25 and into 2026 feels to some of us like a unique problem, a unique form of American crisis in the way that people are being treated. But I wouldn't be surprised at all if there are people in your church who are kind of saying, welcome to our world for the past 25, 50, 75, 100, 150, 200 years, and that they may sympathize deeply. They do sympathize deeply with what's happening right now to immigrants, but they also recognize it, and it's something that they've had to live with. Could you maybe just say a little bit about what you would say about that? Is there an important distinction to be made, or just a way of extending the lessons of the past to the present?
Yeah, and thank you so much for this opportunity to be on this platform with you. I listen to you all the time, and this is just a great honor for me. Well, so thank you. Well, what I would say to that is, in moments like this, where there is grief, fear, uncertainty, faith leaders like myself in neighborhoods and congregations in economically subpar spaces. I'm going to try to be kind with the words that I use today, but our role today is to, one, comfort hurting people that have been hurting through poverty, through redlining, through all of the things that you read about and hear about in the news, violence. And so our job during this moment is to comfort the hurting, but also to tell the truth. And that's the hard part about being a pastor during this time, is telling the truth about what we're seeing during this time. and not only telling the truth, organizing people into action. We just don't preach on Sunday. We stand in the gap during crisis, right? We create space for healing, and we help communities to move from pain to purpose. And that's what I would tell people, like, during this moment. I appreciate that you brought up the past, Colin, because we like to bypass the economic barriers and the wealth barriers in communities like mine. We like to bypass that like that never happened. We like to bypass the fact that Hartford is only Hartford because of the suburbs around Hartford, right? Uh, the median income in Hartford is, probably around or under $30,000. But if you were to look 5 to 10 towns out from Hartford, the median incomes are like 180,000 and above. And that tells a story, right? But I appreciate you bringing the past into this conversation because it really dictates the present.
Yeah, and as long as we're doing that too, I want to just talk a little bit, and this is going to run through all the conversations I have on the show today. A church is a congregation. It's also a set of ideals and beliefs. It is also usually a building. And that building can be very important too. It was in the South during the Civil Rights Movement. Not that church buildings weren't bombed or set fire to, but it was the closest thing sometimes to a sanctuary. Obviously, theoretically, you can't enter without a warrant to go after somebody there. Maybe say a little bit about how you see the actual physical building of a church.
Well, I appreciate that. Well, one, I have the responsibility of keeping open a Black historical institution that was chartered in 1935. We're the oldest apostolic Pentecostal church in New England, on the corner of Westland and Barber Street. So not only do I have to deal with the external pressures of police shootings, of folks not being able to find jobs or being evicted, I also have to keep this building, right? Keep this building up. And these are challenges, right? Because in an already um, economic depressed place, you also have to keep the lights on. And we're redoing a kitchen at our church, and on behalf of Mother Virgil Canty, who you can see some of her artifacts at the Connecticut Museum of Culture. Like, she came from Georgia in like the early 1900s, right? And moved here to Hartford and served in a Jewish family's home up until she passed, right? And we're talking about a couple years ago. But to keep that legacy alive, the building means everything. And I don't know what other folks have to deal with when it pertains to keeping institutions alive. I know for us on Barber Street in Hartford, our institution is a Black institution that people need to see when institutions are crumbling around us, right? And literally crumbling around us. When we look at the Blue Hill Civic Association, it isn't a congregation, but it did serve people. Institutions just crumbling around us. And so we all have to do our part to keep the symbolism of our institutions alive.
All right. I want to circle back to some of this, but I also want to get Cantor Sierra Fox into the conversation. Maybe a through line would be that I'm talking to Pastor Johnson about how there is a kind of tragic familiarity to what we've seen here on the streets of U.S. cities and in the countryside over the last 12 or 13 months. I would assume for a Jewish congregation, there's another kind of tragic familiarity, the idea of uniformed or semi-uniformed people showing up, not necessarily presenting any credentials, grabbing people, placing them in detention centers. This has got to kick a lot of tripwires in a Jewish congregation.
Absolutely. And again, thank you for having us both here on this show. It raises a lot of fears for those who have family members who were in frighteningly similar situations throughout history. And it also reminds us that we have this history to teach us to never let this happen again. There are many who feel like we shouldn't be drawing those kinds of parallels, that calling places, that Alligator Auschwitz, creates a problematic connection that is perhaps not completely accurate, but it doesn't have to be the same exact situation for us to have learned from our lessons of the past to make sure that this happens to no one ever again. And we also recognize that we have changed in many ways in our position in society as Jewish people. There are still many things that are dangerous for us. Anti-Semitism is rampant. It is dangerous to be Jewish, and we have a lot of privilege that we didn't have during episodes of the past. And with that privilege comes an obligation to make sure that this happens to no one else. And it's a privilege that we can use and that I think we're seeing a lot of Jewish people be able to mobilize upon.
Yeah, when you say that too, I think about the Jewish philosopher Levinas and his term difficult freedom, that you have freedom, but it's not without conditions, and it's also not without requirements, without obligations. You have freedom, but the story isn't over, nor are your responsibilities to each other and to maybe people outside your community. I may be not summarizing Emmanuel Levinas very well, but it would go hand in hand. Pastor Johnson and I might be talking about John Lewis and Good Trouble, but I feel like Good Trouble and difficult freedom maybe walk hand in hand.
Yeah, so I'm a member of Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated, and Congressman John Lewis is a frat brother of mine, and I've had the opportunity to walk with him, talk with him, and even had an opportunity to work with him at the Capitol as an intern before my father got sick and had to return to Hartford. But we talk about these divisions, right? And these divisions are very, very toxic during this times, right? Intense moments, it's easy to retreat into camps, right? In this moment in time that we have, it's so easy to get with your people and stay with your people because it's safe. But faith leadership calls us to build tables, not camps, right? And so a large part of my work has been to build tables, whether it be the North Hartford Public Safety Coalition, whether it be a table where people can come together and talk about not only public safety, but talk about what they want in the police chief, talk about what they want out of the Police Accountability Review Board, creating these tables that we can share this information together. We can support due process and demand transparency. We can pray for officers, but also pray for grieving families. We can acknowledge trauma and still call for reform. That tension is not weakness. I call it maturity.
And so, Cantor Fox, I want to go back to you. I think you might have been muted at a certain point. I want to hear a little bit from you about what I said before about that idea of difficult freedom.
I couldn't agree more. And I was moved by this idea of creating tables, not tents. I usually use the language of opening doors. And I think that this, one of the things that our faith communities have as a strength is that we can open doors and we can allow people in to feel safe in expressing all of these things and to engage in the complicated, difficult conversations, to build their stamina for being around differing opinions, and to not allow those differences to create divisions, because those divisions do weaken us and prevent us from doing the important work towards freedom, towards justice, towards goodness, and towards peace. But if we are able to bring those together, if we are able to bridge those divides and allow for differences without division, I think there's so much that we can do.
Cantor Fox also, in any congregation, no congregation is going to be monolithic. Now, you're from a Reformed congregation, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't people in your congregation who voted for Trump or who maybe wanted stronger immigration policies. And I also know that debate and maybe even argumentation are very much part of the Jewish tradition. But this is an important thing. I think I'm going to be coming back to it all day long here. Is one of the other struggles is how do we talk to each other around and engaging our disagreements?
It's such an important question. And, we always joke that argument is a critical part of Jewish identity and discourse. And argument can be such a positive experience if you go into it with curiosity rather than judgment. If you go into it with a willingness to hear the other side, if it's not about necessarily changing minds, but expressing perspectives. I am new clergy, and I say all the time that I feel strongly about many things, and it is so critical to always remain open, to always allow our minds to be changed, to be flexible and allow for new information to change our own perspectives. If we can model that for our congregants too, I think that we can engage in meaningful discourse that feels less like disagreement and more like a possibility for something new.
And, Pastor Johnson, you've got a similar thing, particularly as deputy chaplain in the House of Representatives. I know recently a Republican member from Bristol came in, I think for the opening address maybe, in a blazer that said ICE in on the back, and kind of flashed it, much to the irritation of Speaker Ritter. But, Jesus doesn't say love your neighbor and hate your enemy. And you are the chaplain of all of those people, not just the ones who agree with you politically. Say a little bit about how you process all of that. What do you do with those ideas?
Well, it's a very interesting space to be in, and I'm honored to be there. One, to be the chaplain, but I also realize that I'm chaplain over everyone. I have the spiritual responsibility to give spiritual guidance and prayer to both sides of the aisle. And typically when I go, I keep the focus on what the mission is, right? The mission is to serve the people of Connecticut in responsibility. And so there are times where I have to that tight line.
I think we might be having a little bit of a technical problem with you. We're going to try to help you out with a little technical problem here and get back to you on this. We're just breaking up a little bit, Pastor Johnson. So my team's going to try to help you with that. And as I do that, I want to segue also a little bit to what happens in the realm of liturgy that kind of feeds into this. Cantor Fox, I mean, one of the things that's so interesting about the whole attitude towards immigration right now, particularly from a theological perspective and maybe from a Jewish perspective, is that Exodus, essentially an immigrant story, is such an important part of the Jewish story. And I think of Miriam. I actually looked up the thing in Exodus. Aaron's sister Miriam was a prophet. She took a tambourine in her hand. All the women followed her. They played tambourines and danced. Miriam sang to them, "Sing to the Lord. He is greatly honored. He has thrown Pharaoh's horses and chariot drivers into the Red Sea." As a cantor, you are obviously keenly attuned to the role that music plays in lifting spirits and maybe in creating courage, either to withstand oppression or to do great deeds. Maybe say a little bit about how you see all that.
Absolutely. As I tell my congregants often, lifting our voices can be a form of resistance, both in our ability to create joy and community, but also in our ability to strengthen each other's voices by singing, speaking, by prophesying together. Miriam spoke of this joy of freedom, and that is a joy that we in many ways do experience, but we also remind ourselves that until everyone is free, we cannot be fully free, and there are so many who are not. And so while we may take our timbrels and sing of the gratitude that we have, we know that there is so much more work to be done, and it's a work that is more easily done when we do it together and when we can raise our voices. Now, that doesn't mean we have to be singing in unison. There can be some harmonies, there can be some differing opinions, and we can be coming from different perspectives, but there is still this sense of togetherness and community. And it is one that, I use music both as a tool and a metaphor for, but it is very salient, I think, in both aspects.
Pastor Johnson, same thing in your tradition. I was rereading Frederick Douglass today. He talks about spirituals, telling a tale which was then altogether beyond my feeble comprehensions. They were tones, long, loud, and deep, breathing the prayer and complaint of souls boiling over with the bitterest anguish. Every tone was a testimony against slavery and a prayer to God for deliverance from chains. Those songs still follow me to deepen my hatred of slavery and quicken my sympathies for my brethren in bonds. Music plays just a huge part in all religious worship pretty much, but I think in black churches, in terms of having the courage to steel yourself against oppression, it plays a pretty big role. Say a little bit about how you feel that.
I mean, our church is a very, very singing congregation. I mean, just the song, I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom, or I am free. Praise the Lord. Hallelujah. I'm free. No more, no longer bound. No more chains holding me. These songs speak to a time of when we lived through slavery. And although slavery may not look like it does back then today, we are still in some form of chains, right? When we talk about redlining in our community, we're not free yet. When we talk about, how the economic wealth disparity in Connecticut is beyond incomprehensible, we're not free yet. When we think of how Hartford public school students compared to our suburban students, there's a big gap there, right? And so these songs reflect back to a time, but we still sing these songs today, and they still touch our souls like today. A church like Urban Hope Refuge Church, you will hear songs like this because it connects us back to our ancestors in such a way. And that's the difference between the way we worship and the way others worship. We really dig into the songs of the past. And I have a lot of people in our church who want to move past it. But if we don't teach our kids what the struggle is and how we identify with that struggle, they can quickly, live in this world not knowing what these songs mean and what it's done to uplift our people.
All right, we're going to have to stop there. It's a fascinating conversation. We are very grateful to Pastor A.J. Johnson and to Cantor Sierra Fox. We're going to take a break. We're going to get another perspective right after this.
Walk with your mind on freedom. Walk with your mind on freedom.
Soul of Christ be my sanctification. Body of Christ be my salvation. Blood of Christ.
Hate to mute that, but we have a lot of talking to do here with Sister Mary Ellen Burns, Executive Director and Attorney at Apostle Immigrant Services in New Haven. Welcome to our conversation, Sister Mary Ellen.
Thank you, Colin. I'm very happy to be part of it.
So I know a little bit about you, and I know a little bit about your mother. Ellen Bree Burns was a towering figure in the world of judges, and certainly no stranger to discrimination cases. She halted attempts by the town of Fairfield to block a charity from establishing long-term housing in a residential area for a group of homeless people with AIDS and their families. She addressed school desegregation in Bridgeport. I'm guessing your mother has some connection to the work that you do today.
Well, yes, both that kind of history of that she had in her work, and then she felt real connection just to the idea of immigration My dad was an immigrant, and she heard stories of her grandmother who was an immigrant and those struggles. So she was very supportive of the work we're doing and felt connected to it. Absolutely.
I think also, obviously, your work is connected to the work of Jesus. And I think it's sometimes easy to overlook the way in which he reached out to people who were being what we now call othered. And we other people so that we can mistreat them, I think, at times. When he talks to the Samaritan woman, Samaritans were despised. They were a despised man. Even insisting on sitting and eating with tax collectors. Tax collectors were despised, maybe even more than they are now. That's a really powerful message that can very easily get lost. It seems like it's a cross that you really pick up.
Well, yes, Jesus, that was one of his distinguishing characteristics, I guess, compared to some of the other religious figures of his day, those who gave him a hard time anyway. His reaching out to tax collectors, definitely in that culture, eating with people who were disfavored was a huge scandal. Perhaps the challenges are really highlighted in a dialogue he had with a woman who was Gentile, a Syro-Phoenician woman seeking help for her daughter. And he initially rebuffed her until she said, well, you kind of just compared me to dogs, but even dogs get to eat the scraps from the table. And, Jesus living the message of having to listen to those who are other and be changed by it, because then he said he was wowed by her and said, your faith has healed you, go in peace. So yes, that is definitely a part of who Jesus was in his 33 years and who he calls his followers to be.
I think, and I brought this up with a previous panelist, I think one of the challenges we all face, particularly at a time like this when emotions and ideas are running very hot, is how we deal with people who differ from us. And I'm going to tell you a quick story. I'm going to tell you a story of my success and my failure. So there's some people that I encounter pretty much every day. They are very devout Catholics. They're very pro-life. They also had a daughter who was severely ill and died young. And I think that kind of deepened their connection to the church and to a certain aspect of faith and doctrine. And they're Trump voters. And I have decided to love them, just to love them for who they are and try to understand. But there's also like this guy who comes to where we all are gathered, and he's been yelling at them. He's been yelling at them about the Epstein files and stuff, which I think they're probably in a lot of denial about. And so what I didn't do, this is the failure part, I haven't said to him, hey, that's not helpful. They got to where they are in a certain way, and wasn't an evil or devious way. It's just a different set of beliefs. And I recognized that this morning. I was thinking about all this, that I should have done that part too. But this is one of our challenges. I was saying this to Pastor Johnson too. Jesus didn't tell us to hate our enemies. He had a whole other message.
Right. Quite the opposite, as you've noted. Jesus said, love your enemies. And he engaged in conversation with people who differed from him, as well as debate and sometimes some sharp words. And I think that's such an important distinction that you're making between disagreeing with positions people hold, but holding in respect and acknowledging kind of I'll stay with myself, my ignorance as to how they came to those positions. Mm-hmm. And a sort of, I don't want to say hate the sin and love the sinner, but recognizing, as it's sometimes frankly difficult to do, that people can come to positions that seem very, very wrong to me in ways that don't make them really culpable for holding those positions all the time. And I think you're certainly right. Yelling at people over their positions has a really bad track record for changing their minds.
Yeah, I think people do it for themselves more than for the others. Mm-hmm. And the dynamic that I'm describing here is I'm about to drag you out on a little bit of thin ice here, but a little bit of constant tension for the church, although Pope Leo recently said, someone who says, I am against abortion, but I'm in agreement with the inhuman treatment of immigrants in the United States, I don't know if that's pro-life. David French, who's evangelical, a journalist, but also very, very pro-life, talked about that too, that pro-life is incompatible with malice and hatred. Oh, I've been listening to Jesuitical, which is this great, do you like that? I love that podcast.
Yeah.
He was on Jesuitical, and he said this, that pro-life is incompatible with malice and hatred. And they also talked about the Mar-a-Lago ethos of hedonism and libertinism, which he also regarded as incompatible with pro-life. But this is a problem, right? I mean, doctrine is complicated, and I think Catholic doctrine is complicated, and sometimes it's hard to pull one strand of it out and isolate that strand from everything else in the doctrine. So I just dragged you into a complicated territory. I'm not exactly sure what question I'm asking, but I bet you have an answer anyway.
Well, I think what's complicating it is that frequently we in the United States see everything from a very divided political lens. The Catholic doctrine about life issues can be stated rather simply, from conception till natural death, that human beings have this innate dignity and that has to be respected. But given the political realities in our country and the increasing inability to talk to people even who have a different political opinion, as you just noted, makes a lot of people almost unconsciously approach moral issues through a political lens rather than the reverse. And somebody who's looking at what the late Cardinal Bernardin referred to as this unbroken chain of respect for life, someone who's looking at the American political realities and the positions of political parties through that lens is going to acknowledge immediately neither side is following the whole, is buying into the whole teaching.
These are turbulent and troubling and challenging times. And it seems as though some of the questions we have to ask are internal ones about external events. What should we do? What should I, what any person as what should I do about this? How much should I do about this? How much should I risk to do something about this? I think one of the things that was pretty striking about Minneapolis, and I'll be talking to a pastor from Minneapolis right after you, is that even after it got scary, they were back out there, and it's 20 below. I had a pastor for a while, the amazing Nancy Butler, who, when I first met her, was already dying from ALS. But she just talked about, you pick up your cross. But maybe say a little bit about how you see that, how each person struggles with what it means to pick up your cross.
Yeah, I think a lot of times I hear that phrase used for just anything in life that isn't great.
Yeah.
Right. Pick up your cross that, well, for example, the very serious thing like being diagnosed with something like ALS or another life-threatening condition or a life-altering condition. But Jesus, I think, was referring to it more in the way he picked up his cross, which is living out one's convictions, living out one's faith. And he was very clear that if you do that, you follow me, you will also find yourself picking up a cross, whether it's a very minor one of uncomfortable conversations or being, yelled at by some guy in a restaurant, or, finding yourself in a very terrifying situation. I was also very challenged by seeing those folks on the streets of Minneapolis. And right now, Connecticut is not seeing a Minneapolis type situation with regard to immigration enforcement, but asking myself, where would I be? Where will I be if we do arrive in that situation? those folks were putting themselves beyond discomfort. Eventually, they were saying they were putting themselves at risk. So that's an individual, difficult question. And I wonder if I am unwilling to enter into discussion or make a statement that I know is going to be poorly received by the person to whom I'm making it. Will I have the guts to, accompany people, pick their kids up from school, stand in the streets and say this is wrong when I know there's a greater risk? And I am not sure.
That's very honest. And I share your uncertainty about what I would be willing to do. And let me just sort of close with a kind of a companion question. This, given what you've devoted so much of your life to the cause of immigrants, to the plight of immigrants, this has to be an especially sad time and perhaps angry time, especially for someone who does what you do. Can you tell me a little bit about how you cope with those feelings? Do you just let them ride inside you, or are there things that you do to get yourself on the other side of them?
Well, I'm fortunate in having a community that's willing to listen to those sometimes. I think sometimes holding them in is not the best approach.
Mm-hmm.
I also reflect on them in the light of my faith. I have said, sometimes people are saying, how do you cope? And I don't want to make it seem like I'm in the position of some of the folks we meet with and don't have any clear path to immigration security in this country currently. But it is difficult. And ultimately, what keeps me, and I think some of my colleagues, coming back and opening our office door every day is really actually faith in the resurrection. This is not a great time. And in the proximate view, I don't know how things end, but in the long view, I do. And it's a privilege to be in this uncomfortable place and work through the days that it's just way too uncomfortable, and hope that I can in some way continue to be of use to people whose position is uncomfortable would be a step way up from where mine is.
Sister Mary Ellen Burns, first of all, thank you for that lovely and very thoughtful answer, and thank you for your time today, Executive Director and Attorney at Apostle Immigrant Services in New Haven. We're going to take a break. We're going to talk to a pastor on the front lines, so to speak, or what were the front lines in Minneapolis.
Walk me through this, don't leave me alone. Calling all angels, calling all angels. We're trying, we're hoping, we're hurting, we're loving, we're crying, we're calling, 'cause we're not sure how this goes.
Time to say some thank yous, starting with our technical producer, Dylan Reyes, the maestro. Lily Tyson, our senior producer, produced this episode, and thanks so much to her. We're going to finish with a conversation with Hierald Osorto, senior pastor at St. Paul Lutheran Church in Minnesota. First of all, welcome to our conversation.
Thank you for having me.
I don't know where to start, but maybe start here. Obviously, there's been a drawdown of the ICE invasion of Minneapolis. On the other hand, I would be willing to guess that a lot of your parishioners who stopped going to church, you have a heavily, although not entirely, Latino congregation, as I understand it. I've heard Kevin Kenny, the auxiliary bishop, Catholic bishop of that area, say that in some of the Latino parishes, attendance fell 70% just because people were afraid to leave their homes, afraid to be in places where ICE might be looking. Maybe talk a little bit about the condition right now, the mental, spiritual, and emotional condition of your congregation.
Sure. We get asked this question a lot, actually. And one of the through lines that have been a part of our community's motto during this time is "I am brave because we are brave." And I say that because it has shaped the way that we have shown up as a community. And even though it's a community that has been under extreme danger and despair, that commitment to be community during this time has consistently been the case. However, I think that even with less agents, the ways that we now engage one another and the ways that our nervous systems are reacting will forever have an impact in our lives. The fear continues to be very present, and people are still trying to figure out how to mitigate that fear around their safety. And so from transportation to work, to doctors, to schools, to the needs for grocery, they continue at an all-time high. And now we're also starting to see the impacts on the safety net that people have. And that slowly has been crumbled during these last couple of months. And we're looking for what does this look like in the future in terms of the ways that we respond as a faith community.
As a faith community, you'd also entered into a remarkable partnership with the Jewish congregation, and I believe it's called Shir Tikva, and a congregation of about 600 families. You and their rabbi have become partners in these projects, and you're talking right now about the safety net, about the economic resilience that's needed to get people back up on their feet. This is something that you're working on together, just in terms of raising a fund to help with that very pressing issue. Could you say a little bit about that? Tell our listeners about it.
Of course. So a few weeks ago, we did something bold. Our two communities said yes to joining forces to raise $1 million for mutual aid. And that was never something that we had ever considered doing or even remotely possible in such a short amount of time. But we knew the need was high, and we knew that these moments require that we imagine a different world. And so as partners in this, we were committed to it, and we did. We raised $1,055,000 thanks to the good work of the Yesod Fund, and have distributed aid to help people with rent and other needs that they have in their current lives because of the surge that happened here in Minnesota.
You know, I referenced this in one of the previous interviews, but, you know, what we saw in Minneapolis was kind of amazing, just generally speaking. And even after two people died, were shot, it didn't seem to scare away the people who wanted to object and to do something about this. It's half the time it's 20 below, and people are coming out, and you got people delivering groceries to people who can't leave their homes. Do you think that would happen anywhere? Is there something kind of special about Minneapolis? Do you think that most people just, in a way, would be activated by seeing scenes of injustice, seeing scenes of unnecessary pain and humiliation, would be motivated to do what you saw people do?
A part of me wants to say that we're really special here in Minnesota, but the other part of me believes in humanity and believes that human beings will respond if they were to see what we have witnessed in this city and in this state. And the commitment to creating an ecosystem of dignity and care that we've had here in Minnesota is one that I believe others across the country would also commit to if they faced the diabolical forces that we witnessed.
So let me build on the last thing that you said and ask you kind of a difficult question. What if an ICE agent came to you and said, I'm a Lutheran, I'm from somewhere else, I think I have a job to do here, I think I've been told it's an important job, but I'm uncomfortable with with even words like diabolical. Could you sit with that person? What if that person wanted communion? How would you handle a conversation with one of the people who you understandably have seen as oppressors?
Sure. The through line that we've always said is that all are welcome. And if we believe that, and that is what our gospel has us claiming, then if someone who happens to be an ICE agent came up for communion, We in our tradition would not deny them communion. We would offer that. I think that there is room for change, but I think that in the circumstances that we had to witness here in Minnesota, a conversation is required to really wrestle with the kind of evil that we saw unfolded. I had never experienced the ways that people's lives were just, their humanity was attempted to be erased. And to add to that, the level of fear for people to be able to freely worship and practice their faith is not something that any human should have to face in their lifetime. And I think that that's universal enough that we could all agree that everyone should be able to worship freely and practice their faith.
I know that one of your concerns now is the well-being going forward of this congregation. This is a traumatized community. You have undoubtedly a traumatized and still fearful congregation. It isn't as though it's ding dong, the witch is dead and nobody has anything to worry about anymore. But also there's just scars that are on people who go through something like this. Say a little bit about how you're seeing that, about maybe what you think even needs to happen to begin the repair of that.
Sure. One of the things that we've heard a lot during these last couple of months is that many are experiencing nightmares. Nightmares of what if they were caught up in a raid? What if someone comes and takes away a loved one? And the ways that that is manifesting in family units, we can see it in terms of their health. We have children as young as 12 that are being diagnosed with high blood pressure. We have children in our community that have witnessed ICE agents in their communities that have a level of anxiety that they have never experienced before. And so we're going to have to do some real work around creating ways for our community to both grieve, but also in this moment, we've also made a commitment to claim joy and possibility in the midst of danger. And I think we can hold both of those, not forget that those are still possible, and that as a community of faith, we're called to dream of that abundant life that God has for all of us.
You know, your congregation was, I think, originally Swedish immigrants, and it's undergone several transformations. But I did see a quote from one of your congregants. First of all, he referenced that slogan, "I am brave because we are brave." I believe he's in the choir. I think he's of Norwegian extraction, and he realized that maybe one of the things he could do would be to drive immigrants, people who might be part of the vulnerable population, to rehearsals or whatever in his car, because he realized ICE was using license plate readers. I can't say that.
Yes.
And I don't know. I mean, it's got to be the case, despite the ongoing trauma and the questions about well-being, it's also got to be the case that people found something in themselves. Maybe that guy didn't know that he was the guy who was going to be driving people to rehearsals so they wouldn't get flagged by ICE. Maybe we can sort of end on how you saw the self-discovery of your own flock.
Yeah, I saw an incredible amount of creativity come up in our community, whether that was in how we prepared meals for each other or in the ways that we provided resources to one another. I think that having a community that is directly impacted to also be able to see the power that they have to be agents of change and to provide for their neighbor was incredible. And for others around us to witness that, I think it created a level of a possibility that they saw and that they wanted to respond. And so we've seen that transform our community in ways that I'm still sort of holding to be excited about what that might mean for the future that we know we have as a community together.
Can you do this in 30 seconds? Imagine that ICE is coming someplace else. They're coming to Connecticut, and somebody calls you up and says, "What should we do? What should we know?" Can you give 30 seconds of advice about that?
Claim joy in the midst of danger. Commit to claiming joy in the midst of danger. It's really hard to do, but if it's a practice that you as a community have now, it'll be able to sustain some of the heartbreak that we will experience and that you will undoubtedly experience in your communities.
Hierald Osorto, what a wonderful and beautiful answer that was. Senior pastor at St. Paul Lutheran Church in Minnesota. We're going to say goodbye for now. I hope this show has meant something to you. I think these challenges are ahead of all of us. And we'll see how we do.